Hi, everybody. This is Jay Halfond. I'm pleased to welcome you to Conversations with Experts. This is part of the Higher Education Administration program at Boston University Wheelock College of Education and Human Development. And I'm very pleased to welcome Raul Fernandez today, who teaches in the Higher Education program, as well as serving as Associate Dean within Wheelock College. Raul, welcome to our sixth week of being in the lockdown process of this pandemic, and so that explains why our background is not so much our office as it is our home.
That's right.
Pleased to have you here, Raul.
Glad to be here.
Raul, just to kind of kick it off, I'm sure many of our students know you well and know about your background, know the different things you've done, which are kind of rich in variety and also kind of subtle maybe in terms of the kind of journey you went through to get to where you are now. So could you begin to describe that journey and how you evolved towards student affairs and ultimately then pivoting to a faculty role?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me here. It's one of those things that those of us who end up in higher ed, they always say no one ever goes to school to work in higher ed. So we all have our own unique stories of sort of how we found ourselves in this place, and everyone's always got these different, very unique majors. Everybody from like bio majors to like romance studies to somebody like me who studied both engineering and then communication before coming to higher ed. And so we all come from someplace else. But for me, I started on that more STEM track, going to college actually at BU as an undergrad for engineering, and then later switching over to comm, graduate degree in comm after that. And my first job really working full-time in higher education was in public relations over at Northeastern. And then my first student affairs job was actually a place called the Howard Thurman Center at BU, bit of a community building space, a place where a lot of students of color gravitate toward as well. And that was actually by happenstance. The first assistant director of that space was lived on my floor freshman year in Warren Towers at BU. And she had told me she was leaving the job and thought I might be a good fit for it. That's the only reason I even knew that it was a thing. And it turns out it was a good fit. I was there for about 5 years. Another 5 years at student activities while I completed my doctorate, and then joined the faculty at BU. So that entire time, I started back at BU in 2006. I graduated from BU as an undergrad in 2000, came back in 2006, and I've been at BU ever since.
At what point did you decide you want to make higher education your career?
One of those things that decided for me a little.
Or have you yet?
So far.
Yeah.
Well, it's, I think of a career as being about more than necessarily tied to one industry necessarily. Yep. So I feel like the work that I've done has always been about building connections with people. It's always been about finding problems, and then finding solutions to those problems, and improving the lives, especially of people who are the most vulnerable. And for my purposes, around equity and inclusion, is thinking about how we can actually alter these systems that people are a part of to actually make it so that everyone gets to participate fully and everyone gets to reap the benefits of the work that they're doing. And so I've been doing that in the education space. I've been doing that in the public sector as well as an elected official, and I just try to do that everywhere that I've been.
Does that connect to your own personal experience? Because coming to Boston University as an undergraduate and then eventually as a graduate student, did you connect what you were trying to give back and provide for students to what you yourself experienced?
Yeah, I think I've always, there's something about being able to see, like in the Matrix, you can like see the Matrix, always being able to see the gaps, always being able to see where people are falling through. And not willing to accept that's just okay, that's just the way it is, that some people will have a harder time than other people, or some people just get the short end of the stick compared with others. And I kind of felt like in my own undergraduate experience that I was one of those students that that needed a lot more extra attention and help, didn't have the social capital that other people maybe came in with, and just kind of flubbed my way through it, honestly. In part, that ended up costing me literally financially a lot more in student loans. I ended up staying at BU for 5 years rather than 4 because it took me longer to figure out exactly what my path was and how to make that work for me. So it's really important for me to be able to not just help individual students as they come along, but to try to fix the system in the first place so that that regardless of where people come to, let's say an institution like Boston University, they have the same chance of coming out well at the end.
Mm-hmm. And what sorts of things were you able to do in student affairs that you think helped to accomplish those goals, as well as giving you satisfaction and fulfillment?
Yeah, it was difficult. I would say the like institutions aren't always set up for this kind of change. And one thing, my entire dissertation was about looking back in the past about students' role in trying to move institutions to become more progressive and open and inclusive and all those kinds of things. And, the history of higher education and progress in this way in terms of being more equitable and inclusive has been a history of conflict. The conflict of students, wanting, to move an institution. For instance, going all the way back to thinking about divestment from South Africa during the time of apartheid, for instance, to students trying to hold the line on tuition increases over and over. And we've seen what's happened in institutions where many have just become virtually unaffordable for students, except for now those at the lowest end where they're getting financial aid, but for middle income families, being able to pay for tuition at a place like BU or elsewhere is becoming really tough. And so students all along the way have been fighting to maintain the essence of what education was supposed to be, which is around social equity, which is a ladder for people to be able to climb. And we've seen that over and over again in institutions, fighting tooth and nail to maintain things as they are. Yeah. And so in that way, it hasn't been that easy. It's been tough sledding to do this work at an institutional level, but we've made more recent progress.
Yeah. So you feel it's kind of fighting the tides in some way, that it's going against the grain. Because I think we've been, as an industry, somewhat successful in diversity. We've been much less successful in inclusion. And I do think those things are somewhat different. Inclusion is what you do with diversity in some ways. But correct me if I'm wrong if you feel otherwise.
Yeah, I think we haven't really hit the mark in my estimation in any of the above. Okay. So there is diversity, which is there's no question now that that at all levels of education, many more, for instance, if we're just talking about race, many more students of color are present in educational institutions now. But as a percentage of the population of overall, they're certainly not representative. And so we have a lot more work to do there. And then in terms of inclusion itself, yeah, absolutely. There's even more work to be done. We've been sort of toying around with using more the word belonging rather than inclusion. Yeah. That idea of inclusion being including someone into something that's pre-existing, and belonging being some people feeling like, oh no, this thing was made for me. Like, this is for me. I'm not, and that was the sense when I got to BU as an undergrad. I was looking around and said, man, this isn't
but it's not mine.
Thanks for letting me in here, but I know you didn't make it with me in mind. Yeah. And how do we change that perception for students, but also for faculty and staff too?
Yeah, no, I like the word belonging, and I think belonging is both an end in itself, but also a means to an end, because the graduation rates, the success rates, the opportunities that can come from this, that all, I think, is preconditioned by the extent to which you feel like you belong in an institution.
Yeah, I'll say too that the even on the target has been moving, right? So it used to be you needed a high school degree and that was good, and then right. Of course then you need an undergrad degree. You got to have an undergrad right. degree, and now it's you got to have a grad degree. So as we get more and more diversity in elementary and high school, and then we get it more in undergrad, the goal line just keeps moving and moving in terms of what it is you need to be successful, at least in the professional world.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the biggest difference is between a high school graduate and a college graduate. But then you're right that obviously many professions expect you to have at least one graduate degree, often several. And so if those don't provide access, then we're simply pushing the problem to a different level.
Right, particularly when you get even jobs that you know the ideal candidate has an undergraduate degree, let's say. But if you've got a stack of resumes and the you know the top 10% of those resumes have master's degrees, why not?
Right, exactly.
So why not hire one of those? So it's big, you know, it's which of course has all these other implications that we talked about in terms of being able to afford higher education.
Yeah,
it's been tough.
And Raul, why did you make the transition into being a faculty member? Obviously, that transition involved you being a full-time administrator and being a part-time student at the same time. So you're multitasking in your pursuit of advanced degrees. What was the motivation there? What was the goal? I would think you could have been happy and successful as a student affairs professional.
Right. I mean, let me tell you, I was already in the process to take a job elsewhere as a chief diversity officer, and literally was in the last stage, had already met with the president and everything, done that, and I was the final candidate. And then BU came a calling with this opportunity to join the faculty, and it was very exciting to me to I mean, it's a complete lifestyle change is what it is. And that was the most appealing part to me, to be able to engage more directly with students in the way that we do as faculty, to be able to build out a curriculum for our coursework, to be able to have a lot more freedom and flexibility in terms of our own life scheduling was really appealing to me. And great decision, like terrific decision. I feel like much more comfortable working in this way than I ever did working as a sort of full-time administrator.
Yeah. What kind of challenges did you find, kind of pivoting to a faculty role?
Honestly, it was great. I mean, we had, good support. I imagine it might be different elsewhere. But at Wheelock, I've always felt like really supported by our dean back then, Dean Coleman, and now by our current dean, Dean Chard. Surrounded by in our department in educational leadership and policy studies, like really great faculty. Just really interesting, diverse. Everyone doing different kinds of work. It just felt really comfortable for me. Like slipping on an old pair of shoes that you've never worn, though. It just felt really comfortable. Honestly, I've thrived probably in this environment more than anywhere else.
Yeah. Tell us about your doctorate and how you pursued that. How did you, first of all, even from a time management point of view, how did you pull that off while you're also working full time? And what kind of research did you do that gave you the ability and confidence to then move into a faculty role?
Yeah, that was rough, man. It's like I always tell people when they're thinking about it, I say you can do it, you can absolutely do it. It just won't be easy. Just don't,
Yeah. A lot of us get to the coursework phase doing pretty well, but then when we get to the dissertation phase, that's where the separation usually begins, because that requires a lot of independent work and creative thinking, and it's the ability to research and write a book.
Yeah.
Not easy.
Essentially, what you're being asked to do is to select a topic. It can't be too general, but it also can't be too narrow. And essentially learn everything or read everything that's ever been written on that particular topic, right? So you want to be narrow enough so you can do, like, you have to be as well informed as anyone else around this particular topic, which is actually kind of exciting. You're real expert. But also it's time consuming, especially when if you're not going full time. If you also have a full time job at the same time, there was a time where I just didn't remember anything but always having something to do. And that's like the overwhelming feeling is there was no enjoyment of anything that was guilt-free. Like, you can go out, but you just, this work is waiting for you when you get back, and you could be doing the work instead of going out or going on a trip or
Yeah.
seeing family or enjoying a holiday or whatever. It's
Wow.
nothing guilt-free.
Well, hopefully it's guilt-free at this point
Oh,
of
it's
your
great
career.
now. No, it's terrific.
Okay.
But that's part of it, and I think that's part of why you feel so accomplished at the end of it,
Yes.
because you have put that much work in, because it was that difficult. One of the pieces of advice I always give to students is run fast while you can,
Right.
because you never know. Because there's been, I had other folks who started at the exact same time who never finished. Other folks who finished much later because life happens, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
you
yeah.
might have children.
Right.
Your partner gets a job somewhere else. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons
No.
why. It's not the kind of thing where you say, well, I know what the next year and a half is going to look like, so I can do this.
Yeah.
But this requires you to be able to commit to something that could take much longer than that, in years.
Yeah. No, I purposely gave the birth of my son as my deadline for finishing my dissertation, which actually was a very good motivator, because I knew I wouldn't have any time after that. So I finished the month before he was born.
That's perfect.
So it helped out quite a bit.
Yeah.
So what have you enjoyed about teaching? Besides, well, online and on campus, I'll broaden the scope of what you've done.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the ability. So I teach a lot. This one course, equity. So I teach two courses primarily, because I don't know if folks know, but I'm also mostly now working as the Associate Dean for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, which takes up a ton of my time. So I'm teaching essentially Diversity and Justice in Education, AP 600, and then AP 801, which is our professional development seminar. And both are very different classes. AP 801, we'll start there. That's primarily our full-time students, although other students can take it too. That one I love, because it is that classic, like when you watch a movie about, and you see people sitting around like an oak table or something like that. It's a very small class. Like that is what that course is. And
in your Oxford University office. Yes.
Exactly, yes. I don't have that office yet.
Yeah, right.
But that's the kind of environment where you're literally sitting around, and it's not about like one-to-many instruction. It's about let's like work together, let's talk together, let's co-create knowledge. You take the lead today, you're taking the lead.
Right.
And it's not just, it feels more like we're in it together. I talk a lot with students as me being a thought partner for them in any class. But I think it's like the classic thought partner position is in that very small class there. And then there's the diversity and justice course, which I love, because we've got all these students that are coming from all these different backgrounds, and they're all at different levels in their understanding of issues related to equity. This was great. Dean Chart was talking about this the other day, but the idea of like an IEP, which is individual education plan for each person in our community, right? So some may come to us like very well steeped in issues related to like, let's say like race and like sort of like economic identity, right? Class identity, as they call it. But that doesn't mean that they know a ton around gender and sexual identity, or around like faith and the impact that has on people. And this is what we have in this class, is like usually 25 students with a variety of experiences that they're bringing to it. And to be able to have meaningful conversations, not just about the history of identity and oppression and social justice, but also about what's literally happening right now. It's so topical. We start every class with about the first 30 minutes is just what's happening in the world right now. What are you seeing out there? And there's always something to talk about.
Right. Yeah. And how do you compare? So one end of the spectrum is you're working intimately with students as a thought partner, with then teaching online, which is a much bigger, broader, in some ways more remote experience. So how do you bring that same sentiment to a larger class?
Yeah, I think it's even more so because that idea of people coming from different backgrounds, I think is even amplified, where they're not just coming from different places, they're currently in different places.
Exactly.
And so that I think has been really cool to see, like, when there are things that are happening in the world, usually we're all in the Boston area if you're in an on-campus course, right? But when you have an online course, you say, oh, that's happening in my state right now. That's what's happening in Georgia right now. I can actually talk about that because at our institution, we're being directly impacted by those policies, right? And that, I think, adds another level to that kind of engagement.
When you think about diversity in the classroom experience, the online distance learning environment is perhaps the most exciting thing we've ever done in that regard, because it breaks down it overcomes the homogeneity of a region. No matter what we try to do, intellectually in our classes at Boston University, if we're preaching to a local or a local professional group, then chances are their experience is not that broad.
Right.
Their range of experience is not that broad, and bringing in students from around the country, maybe potentially around the world, almost is the perfect environment for bringing up the kind of issues you want to bring up.
That's right.
Yeah, so that makes it very interesting. Speak a little bit about your associate dean role, because that's something that you thought you were a full-time faculty member, only to then find that that's going to be chipped away a little bit with this other role, which you now have to have multitasking, balance between, going back to being an administrator in a sense, and still being primarily, in terms of your identity, a faculty member.
Yeah, they call that being called into service.
Okay, is that what it is?
Yeah, that's what it is. So, it's interesting. I was talking about this recently. So there are all these different associate deans, and there's the academic dean, there's the research dean, there's faculty affairs, et cetera, right? And then there's this other one, this associate dean for equity, diversity, and inclusion. And whereas generally speaking, you want to stay in your lane, right? Like the research person focuses on research, the academics, et cetera.
There ain't no lane for you. Yes.
There ain't no lane. So when you are like the chief diversity person in any level of institution, every lane is your lane, right? And so in some cases, I'm expected to weigh in on, or at least help, sort of weigh in or operate as a consultant for others, right? To be able to just add another lens to it, a different voice to it, another perspective, somebody that's not really steeped into the very specifics of what's happening, but can then look from ask what maybe only a person that's not heavily involved in it would ask about it. And to think about, to do that, to play that role. And then there's other times where you've got to, knock and say, excuse me, seems like I might be able to be helpful here.
Whether you like it or not, or you ask for it or not.
Yeah. Would you mind if I attended that meeting or jumped on that call to listen in and maybe provide some feedback? So it's I think so much of it is relational. You have to be, my approach to this work has been setting high and clear standards for everybody, but then really taking a growth approach to it. Meaning, as long as someone is moving toward those standards, they're moving in the right direction, and that their heart is in the right place. Like that to me is what matters more than anything else. I'm not about wagging my finger at anybody and saying, look how bad you are at this, or I'm not about trying to get rid of anybody. I think that everybody has value, and that that part of our mission as an educational institution, and I don't think the learning environment that we create is just for our students. I think it's for us as well. I think it's for our faculty, for our staff. And so I approach it from that perspective, because if someone, let's say we have a faculty member that isn't really up to these standards, but could be, that faculty member is probably going to go teach somewhere else if they don't feel, loved, appreciated, like someone's willing to work with them. And then those students, wherever they are going to suffer, right? Because that faculty member hasn't embraced sort of inclusive pedagogy and those kinds of things. So my approach is everybody has value, and I want to work with everybody as long as they're willing to meet me halfway, and to meet our institution halfway, because frankly, this focus, this central focus on equity and inclusion is the base of everything else that we're doing as a college, and I would argue even to an extent as a university. And so we want everybody to improve semester over semester, our faculty, our staff, and certainly as we bring students in, I think that's a responsibility of ours too. So I think set high and clear standards, and then provide as much resources as we possibly can to help people move toward those standards.
So high and clear standards, improvement, with what kinds of goals? The goal of numbers, the goal of how you teach and what you teach and how you make students feel welcome and included? Like, what are some of the major factors? Because clearly, I mean, as I hinted before, numbers alone is not sufficient. That's a prerequisite. You can't play without the numbers. But then the question is, what do you do with that?
Right, and I'd say all the above. Right now, we're going through our strategic planning process, and we've got one of our pillars is equity, diversity, and belonging, and we're sort of operationalizing. Well, what does that mean? What are our goals and objectives related to that? Some are around hiring and around admissions.
Right.
Beyond that, it's all about not just hiring admissions, but also how do we onboard people, all students, faculty, and staff. How do we onboard people, and how do we sort of inculcate them into this this focus on equity, diversity, and belonging in our college? So we think so right now, let's talk about faculty specifically. If our standards are here, when I talk about these standards, I do mean like what it means to teach a course where all students feel valued and affirmed and respected, even if they've got. It doesn't mean that you don't have disagreement. It doesn't mean that you don't have the competition of ideas. None of that. But that as people, they feel valued, affirmed, and respected. Right? To do those kinds of things. What does it mean for us to think more broadly as an institution about those students that, for instance, Pell eligible students that are eligible for a Pell Grant, they could have their tuition covered by the institution, which is terrific. That's huge that BU does that. The vast majority of institutions don't do that, right? So that's huge. However, when they get to BU Wheelock, there are all these other costs, right? And they're the costs that you don't necessarily think about, like the books and a T-pass, because you got to go do some student teaching, and also a cap and gown when you're graduating, and all the other things that are in between. So
and dressing to teach, and the whole wardrobe of being a pre-professional in some ways, I think plays into it.
Absolutely, the dress too. Forget about it. So the goal here is to decentralize who's focused on that, because right now certainly our dean's focused on it. I'm focused on it. I think the other deans are focused on it. And then to a certain extent, we have some chairs, some program directors, some faculty that are focused on these issues. The goal is to decentralize it so everyone's focused on these issues. So even if your associate dean for equity, diversity, and inclusion isn't in a position to see this inequity, it doesn't matter, because someone else will see it. Someone else will spot it. Someone else will raise that issue, and then we'll find a solution, right? And so if we are, our capacity to do that right now is, let's say, at 50%, every time we hire a new faculty member, if they are much more aware of these issues, if they're already sort of teaching in an inclusive way, if they're already advising in an inclusive way, and if they're already conducting research, service, and everything else that faculty are expected to do in a really super inclusive and aware way, then every time we bring on a new faculty member like that, or a new staff member like that, it improves the average. It makes us as an institution even better. And so that's why who we hire is so important every time we have an opportunity, which there are very few and far between, honestly, opportunities to hire faculty and to hire staff too, right? Someone's got to leave usually before we can hire someone new. And thankfully, we don't have people leaving all over the place, right? People generally like to be here, and so it can take some time. That part is really, really important. And then, of course, we can't assume, again, that everyone's perfect or that anyone's perfect. We've got to provide the resources for people to be able to engage with our Center for Teaching and Learning, to be able to engage with outside resources and create our own internal resources so that people can become better. And when I say what I mean by saying become better is become more attuned to be able to actually understand how to create an environment that works for gender nonconforming students, for Muslim students, for students with disabilities of all different kinds. And there's not a single one of us at our institution or another that doesn't have some work to do.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay. So how will you evaluate your success at the end of the year? If it's so sort of, if there's no lane for you to ride in, how do you know if you're doing a great job or not?
It's interesting because if we're doing better as an institution, then I'm doing better.
Okay.
So there, I really appreciate this strategic planning process because it actually provides, it operationalizes our vision. It operationalizes, where we say we want to be in the next several years. And so when we're done with that process, we'll know how to evaluate it. So we're all creating SMART goals under each. And by the way, I mentioned the one EDB, but there's one around research. There's another one around advocacy, for instance, which we're calling now, I think it's allyship, activism, and advocacy as one of our pillars. And so there are all these different metrics that we're going to have at the end of that. And I think that's really great because it's not just about, I always say policy over platitudes. It's not just about what you say. It's how do you actually put that into your policy,
and then how do you measure it and evaluate it? And,
absolutely.
Because I'm as you're talking, I'm remembering cases in various state legislatures where they were thinking of doing away with diversity officers because they couldn't quite demonstrate their value, and so there were attempts at budget cutting at the expense of those who are full-time focused on diversity. So so arming those people would be very, very important, I would think. I don't mean arming in the literal sense, but arming them with data and testimonials and cases that show, in fact, that they are making a difference.
Right. And I would say, it's kind of like there's a screw somewhere. You only know its value when it's not there, right? That's when you see the value is when it's not there because of how much it holds things together, right? And so, for me, I always flip it. I say, look, you can say that you care about something, but unless you put resources toward it, then you don't really. And there's people ask how do you best accomplish this work of equity and inclusion? I would say you need three things. One, you need the person who's at the top of the org chart to be 100%, not just on board, but helping to lead the charge, really pushing people. We have that in our dean. Then you need to have a point person who now is going to be, when that person at the top of the org chart is focused on a million things, one person that's laser focused on this issue. You got that. And then three, you need to put whatever resources are necessary to make it happen. And that's where things get a little bit tricky because now when we talk about resources, they're limited. And so it's competition for resources. So, what does it mean, for instance, in admissions, if we say it is of paramount importance to us that we increase the percentage of students of color at our college, then it would follow that the first money out the door in terms of financial aid should go to those students, right? Of course, there's competing interest there as well. Right?
Zero-sum game.
Right. And so, so if that money's going there, then where is that money not going? What areas of need are being missed, right? And so that's where the dialogue and the conversation and the tensions tensions come, honestly. And magnify that by a bunch of other decisions where resources are limited.
Well, it seems like there's a nice symbiosis in terms of what you do as associate dean and what you do in the classroom and maybe even what you do elsewhere. So each one seems to inform the other. So it's not like you're trying to balance competing jobs in a sense and competing goals, but in fact things that overlap nicely and probably make you better at each. Because you really couldn't be an associate dean without teaching, and you really couldn't be teaching without having had solid experience and now enhancing that experience and broadening it much more strategically.
Yeah, you bring everything to the table, and my background in PR and sort of being able to sort of communicate and those kinds of, those all fit together. I like what I've seen time and time again. I've seen this in government. I've seen this at BU. I've seen this elsewhere. Is if you can identify the problem and name it, that most problems can be solved with existing resources. I really believe that, right? There's some that are just I don't know, that's a big one. That's like a 3 to 5 year problem or something. Most problems honestly can be solved with existing resources. You have to pull the right people together I always like to get people together and lay it out and say, hey, this is the current situation. Do we think that's okay? And if we all agree it's not okay, right? If we all agree it's not okay, then can we also agree that the people in this room are the ones that have some responsibility to do something about it? Maybe not full power, because there's always other, considerations, but we've got some semblance of responsibility here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
No. When I was dean, I would never want to start a discussion with talking about resources first. People often said, "Well, are we going to have money to do this?" Sort of lamenting and almost giving up in advance. And I would postpone the resource question, because very often they would forget that there's even a resource implication, and because, as you say, there may not even be a resource issue per se. But people almost want to rationalize resources as a barrier to keep them from having to actually go, do go through the effort of leading change.
Yep. And I think people are so used to problems being, it's the reason, the difference between saying around people who are experiencing homelessness versus homeless people. Right. Like when you call them homeless people, it is an acceptance that they always have been homeless and always will be homeless.
Yes.
Right.
It's a categorization.
It's a total difference saying that people experiencing homelessness. And by the way, they might be experiencing chronic homelessness for the last 10 years. It doesn't mean that they always need to be. And the moment that we accept that our problems are faded, and that we will always have students of color will always be underrepresented, students with disabilities will always have a subpar experience in coursework or in other aspects of university life, or the list goes on and on and on. The moment that we just accept that that's the way it is, we've raised the white flag. We've given up. Yeah. So I think it's better to say, like, hey, can we just agree that this is not acceptable? And if we can we agree that we've got some responsibility here to do something, whatever's in our power to do? If we can agree on that, then how about let's start to push on this. Let's come up with some solutions. Let's see what works,
Yeah, and even if you don't succeed at the level you want to, it's exciting to try, and it's great to participate, and that helps to build a community of people that think alike and enjoy working together, even if they don't always achieve their idealistic goals.
Yep. So
briefly tell us, so you were not busy enough, you decided you had to become an elected official as well?
Right.
Okay. And so Brookline, Massachusetts does not have a mayor. It in fact has a handful of people. What is it, 5 of you?
5 of us, yeah.
Who serve as select persons, or whatever the title is, and so you're kind of co-mayor in a sense of the town of Brookline.
Right, it's like mayor by committee. There are 5 of us, and so our structure is this 5-person select board, which comprises the executive, and then instead of a city council, we have a town meeting, and ours is represented. So some towns have a town meeting where they pick 2 dates in the year, and whoever shows up gets the vote. Ours is representative, which means people run for that as well. And there are 240 town meeting members across our town of 60,000 people.
Yeah.
And so that's how we manage things. And they're our legislative body. So it's and they only meet twice a year in May and November.
So the word manage may be generous in that kind of context.
Yeah. It is. It is challenging to operate in this way. And I think there's a reason why most municipalities that are our size are not towns, they're actually cities. So we are right now the largest town in Massachusetts at 60,000 people. There are cities that are significantly smaller than us, actually.
Yeah.
And so I think a change of government is coming, but one of the things that we're able to do, and we see it right now in terms of we're the body that is making the decisions related to COVID about what's open and what's closed, and beyond what the governor's doing, and about how to try to keep people safe during this time and making difficult decisions as part of it. I was actually working on a list of focus areas earlier this morning, which is all about thinking about what issues have already been there but have been amplified by this crisis. So things like the digital divide, who has access to internet and computers and things like that. Food insecurity has gone out the roof. We've always had a food pantry. They're seeing, I think, multiple times more the number of people that were in need of their services before. Childcare, and how difficult it is right now. people have always had difficulty accessing childcare. I think a lot more people are understanding now,
Right.
that didn't have difficulty maybe accessing childcare, what life is like when you can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah, only about half of us, have a job that we can work from home. The other half are still going to work, if they're lucky, if they have a job, and they're being exposed to the virus.
Right.
So talk about inequities, those who are exposed to disease and those who aren't. I mean, that's a dramatic factor. And as you say, if you don't have a job, then food insecurity, childcare issues, a whole lot of things creep up. I mean, it must be fascinating.
Yeah.
So speaking of the pandemic, so bringing it back to higher education, and we can wind up pretty soon with talking about this, I think. Thinking about the pandemic and its impact potentially on higher education, near term and long term, are you an optimist or a pessimist? Do you see this as a disruption that you welcome and see great things maybe happening because it exposes problems that will now solve? Or do you feel somehow that this is going to be a spiral down for us in a number of ways?
Well, I think without question, we were already in a tough environment for certain institutions. So there were already institutions that in 2020 were going to close their doors.
Yeah.
I think that number is going to grow now.
Okay.
Almost certainly. And those are institutions that are generally smaller, especially institutions that have relied a lot on international students to meet their budgets and don't have the kind of endowment that can suffer a blow that institutions are going to face in this coming year, and that have a lot of students that are on a ton of aid. And some of those were already in Massachusetts and closed before this.
I know the school you're describing in Brookline right now,
yes.
which is, I'm sure, is top of mind.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be really tough sledding for institutions like that. Though I wonder how much places like larger institutions that have the resources that are definitely going to still be there on the other side of this. I wonder how much we're going to learn. And what lessons we're going to learn from this. So
or not,
right? And so that's something that's still on my mind. Will we change or at least provide more opportunities for our methods of instruction? Will we decide that a lot more of our work can simply be done without having to have these physical spaces? Where which by the way cost our institutions a ton of money. Right? It's faculty are notorious for having private offices and dropping by them occasionally to water their plants, right? And
maybe.
Maybe. Right?
Yeah, I wonder how many faculty ever meet the person who's in the office next door.
Right. Well, we're all there at different times. There's certainly been times where I've been the only person on the floor, right? And I'm sure there are other faculty that have had the exact same experience. So when you think about things like that, starting to rethink how we use space and time and resources, and whether or not people can just be trusted to work from home. Frankly, the last month, I think I've worked more, been in more meetings than before this. And part of that's because of all the decisions we have to make. But
because we're all losing track of time and weekdays versus weekends. It all kind of runs together. I mean, there's no real difference anymore.
Yeah, and the thing is that when you hire people to do a job who actually care about their job and are passionate about the work that they do, you don't need to watch them, right? And you just you put your checks and balances in, all that kind of stuff. But you let people do what they do, and I don't know. So I'm curious to see what impact that has. I know as we're taping this right now, as we're recording this right now, we don't know what the fall is going to look like at our institution. Never mind, let's say we can independently make decisions. We also don't know what the city of Boston's going to do, what the state of Massachusetts is going to do, what the future of this virus. Just so many uncertainties, and uncertainty does not work well in this sector. Probably any, but for us,
it's hard to plan your teaching for the fall if you don't know if there's going to be a campus for the fall.
We've got to plan months ahead of time. You think about our students, particularly graduate students that don't live on campus. need to sign leases for apartments,
Right.
So I don't know. This is going to be a tough blow to everybody.
But speaking primarily or mostly to our current students, would you say the future is somewhat sort of cautiously bright for their careers? In other words, are we in a jeopardy of reducing the number of opportunities that our graduates have, or simply will those opportunities change? Will some schools go out of business? Others will thrive. Will some jobs be phased out or phased down? Others will increase. I tend to think there's an aggregate stability in the future, but what composes that aggregate may change dramatically.
I think that's right. I also think that people like our students. In just a minute, I'm going to jump back. I'll jump into class with our full-time cohort.
Yeah.
But as I was talking with them, I think that just like we all come to higher ed from all these different places, I think that there are careers for us in higher ed, but also things like foundations and nonprofits,
right.
And schools, boarding schools, things like all these other sort of ancillary sectors and fields, and I think we should be prepared to work in all of those places.
Yeah. So higher education broadly defined.
Right. And I think if we look at that broader outlook, I think it's a bit rosier. But we should, I try to keep it as real as I possibly can with our students, and it's gonna be tough sledding for a little while, but the decisions that we all make within the next 6 to 12 months, I think are going to determine how well we rebound from this.
Okay.
And so I think we've got to have our eyes on our school leaders and our institutional leaders like we never have before. And if we want them to make certain decisions, we need to write them letters and reach out to them and encourage them to make those decisions. But what they do in the next 6 to 12 months is really going to define, at the aggregate level, what our field looks like.
Good. On that note, so Raul has to go from one Zoom meeting to another, and his reference to where we are now with the pandemic. It's April 27th, so we'll see what happens.
Right.
In the coming weeks. We'll see how good our leadership and rank and file can be in being nimble for the unknown in the fall.
Yep, absolutely.
Thanks so much, Raul. Take care and enjoy your teaching online.
Thank you. Great talking to you, Jay.